So I've come to find the importance of representation within the media, especially within Indian country. Indian country is lucky and privileged to have the many extremely talented and dedicated Native journalists covering the issues and stories within our communities. Many of them are here today covering this historical event. However, the Native voice is often left out or not heard in mainstream media. Our stories are not often covered and issues not considered due to the lack of representation within the mainstream media. If and when Native issues do make national news, it's often misreported on because they don't understand Native history or federal Indian law. I believe it's important for the next president to bring in the expertise that Indian country has in terms of journalism and reporting. It's important for Natives to exercise our First Amendment right and to have that seat at the table to be able to ask these questions that directly impact our communities. So my question to you is, if you become president, how would you create spaces for indigenous journalists and Native media to be at all White House press briefings and other media gatherings? And how will your administration's transparency be inclusive to Native media?
Good question, but I also think it ties into your comment of inviting me at places. I believe a president, like the captain of a ship, by where he goes and what he does, sets a tone. So if all of a sudden you have a president visiting 80, all of a sudden people start paying attention. And I mean that. I mean, my first day, I'm gonna hold a town hall in the middle of America, you know? And then I expect to keep holding them in various places. But that's one way. The second way is to mandate that there are to be access in billets, positions in the White House journalist. But the other way is to reinstitute that summit that was held every year at the White House. It is no longer being done for the Native American leadership. That is no longer there. But I also think this, and I'll be frank, I knew about for quite some time human trafficking and missing women, but I forgot until I was reading the other day how enormous it was. The fact that you can have a study come out and say 5,000. Imagine if that was in a suburb somewhere. Would that hit the news? And so your issue isn't one of just making sure, I know, that there is more views of what the Native American community is thinking of. It's got some issues. The 5,000. 5,000 missing, and not just from reservations, from cities is probably maybe even where the majority are. So I think this is what I might call almost a national security issue. And I think part of that can be by the president staying at the bully puppet and as a lectern at a press conference and bringing it up themselves. He can't mandate that the press corps has to do it, but he can mandate that they are there at the White House briefings. But I think it's incumbent upon him to bring them up. It's funny, on a Navy ship, if a captain walks down a whole passageway, and OJ can back me up on this, and turns and just looks at a bulkhead for 5 seconds, and then walks on, 4 or 5 sailors are there cleaning it up right away. It might be clean. I feel that same way. What does that president pay attention to? And it must be here, particularly after I reread that article about 5,000, or maybe have been missing. So I get your point, sir. That's how I would do it. Presence of me, mandated at the press conferences, but bringing it up oneself.
Thanks everyone for joining us. We are here in Sioux City at the Native American Presidential Forum.
Just follow up with
Listening
that,
to Joe,
and you can go into your closing statement.
presidential candidate.
But one issue of representation that fits right into that is the federal judiciary. There's only one Native American
of
judge in the
Indian
entire
country today who is the
judiciary.
moderator.
How would you make sure that there's better representation solving some of these complex legal issues?
Yeah, I think it is incumbent upon me to make sure that those who are pushing forward recommendations has a direct link into those who come to that summit. Often, having watched in Pennsylvania how some of these nominees sometimes get in line. It has a lot sometimes to do with how much is contributed to one's campaign, and I think you're aware of that. This issue of money is enormous. And you're not going to be having large campaign contributions coming. And that's incumbent on having, very much like people argue about gerrymandering, have a commission. I think it has to be, and I'll take it on myself, a much more judicial, objective process to have them come up. I did not know there was only one.
Thank you. Do you want to make a closing?
I'll make one closing statement. First of all, I appreciate the questions. I also think I learned a bit. And I have somebody, if this is live stream still, somebody back living in an Econo Lodge, about 50 straight days now, and they're copying down the comments that I'll write down that if the Lord permits, the president won't be forgotten. I'll give you my personal email after this on that. I don't say it lightly, joe@joesestak.com. But I'll end with this. I do believe that the state of the Native American community is what it is because we were a colonial power and we fragmented. What was a well-governed, a well-managed, a healthy community over decades. Carlisle in Pennsylvania was the most notorious of schools of the racist attitude of where they would literally take kids away from their parents and try to assimilate them into the white man's culture by under that said, kill the Indian, save the man, was the motto of the school, right where I was teaching, actually, there in Carlisle. But what I will say is this. I honestly do believe that we are always in search of the more perfect union of two wonderful characteristics. Rugged individuals who try to be all one might be, but always combined with the common good. I bring that up because it's not as applicable, but it is applicable. Because here, to the gentleman's point before I came out here, Julian, I think, said it. The military is one of the stable ways for someone to try to make his or her way out of poverty here at times. And I'll never forget when I joined the Navy, we didn't have women on ships. And then, when I was off Afghanistan, we had them flying the most advanced fighter aircraft. And I remember when I arrived off the coast of Afghanistan to begin our strikes, and I launched 8 pilots at first strike, because I wanted to go down perfectly. 7 were men who had been in the first Gulf War. They were pros from Dover. The 8th was someone we call a nugget, who had never been over a foreign country before in combat. Brand new pilot, she was about 25 years old. And she was the one who disobeyed orders that night, not to die below 20,000 feet without permission. Because we knew the Taliban had Stinger missiles from when they used to be the Mujahideen, and they were fighting the Soviet Union, so we gave them Stinger missiles that could go up about 18,000 feet to shoot down the Soviets' helicopters. And we didn't want my pilots to go below 20,000 feet where they might get shot unless we first had a chance to clear it out. But 8 special forces were ambushed. 4 died immediately. And they said they're too close to laser ammunition. We've got minutes left. Somebody dive. The male pilots asked permission. That woman pilot, that brand new one, felt she couldn't wait for permission. And risking her career as a minimum, if not her life, she dove from 20,000 feet to 3,000 3 times at 0200 in the morning. and those 4 men picked up their dead and came home. I bring that up because we are on a journey for everyone to have an equal opportunity. Mental health, it could be almost anything here, to where it is funding. But it's funding because if she hadn't gotten that opportunity, the common mission of the Navy wouldn't have succeeded better that night. We want the best of all. And so these issues, to my mind, aren't just for the individual of the Native Americans. It is also for the common good of America. Because if you have healthier, less suicidal, and productive and educated individuals with the proper funding and accountability for it, to your example, as one, we all benefit. And to me, that's the kind of approach I will take in. The money has to be accountable, but it also has to be there. And it's not just, I tell people, for that demographic, it's so we all benefit. Thank you very much.
Thank you to our panelists and the audience. We'll be back in a few minutes with the next panel.
This attack was really late. Sorry, the whole schedule changed it. Anyways, just want to let you know we're here. I want people to pay attention to the questions. We're going to mute this or we will lose audio. So I'm going to have to mute it. We'll unmute it after the song.
Mayor, for our next panel, if I could ask Larry Wright, Snuffy Main, Amber Torres, and OJ, would you please report to the backstage? If you're in the room right now, please meet me over here. This is to my right, stage left to you. Again, Larry Wright, Snuffy Main, Amber Torres, and OJ. Thanks so much.
That's okay. I'm live. Yeah, it doesn't matter.
Is somebody sitting next to
Oh, I'm gonna go back down. Don't think so. I guess that was just an announcement. We'll be back in a few minutes for Mark Charles, independent candidate here at Everyone, thanks for joining us. We will be back in a few minutes for the next panel. It'll be independent candidate Mark Charles. We're here at the Frank Lamere Native American Presidential Forum. We're going to keep meeting it between panels to make sure we do not get hit by that algorithm that has shut down our other feed. So thanks again for joining us. We are here. We are live. Be soon.
Hey, this is just a public service announcement. I haven't done one before, so this is going to be pretty cool. There's a silver Suburban.
We're gonna keep music and self. Whoa.
CCJ, Charles John.
Everybody who's just waiting here with me, I just want to announce that we are muting it so we don't get that algorithm that muted and basically banned one of our videos yesterday of this historic event. It is the first time a Native American presidential forum where all the questions the candidates are asking are coming from Indian country has happened. We're going to keep here, we're going to keep live, we are going to keep it muted to make sure we don't lose this historical information. Thanks. All right, everybody, it looks like the next panel is coming out. Thanks so much for sticking with us. You can see, in case you don't know how the formats have been going, it is an all indigenous Native American panel from, I think it's like, I'm assuming where the candidate comes from at times when they can manage that. But you can see also it's made of different genders and age groups. So like a plethora of people and questions you're about to experience. We interviewed somebody yesterday talking about how that's important because the whole community is of all people, and so they have like youth to older folks, elders maybe. I don't know if I should. Oh yeah, different generations. There we go. Anyway, so thanks for joining us. We are going to be live next. We have independent candidate Mark Charles.
Friends and relatives can have your kind attention. They asked me to introduce the next speaker, our candidate. Give me a little bit of time here. Mark Charles is a well-respected Dene who was born in Gallup, New Mexico. He is an activist, a former pastor of the Christian Indian Center in Denver, and a consultant for the Native News Online, where his blog, Wireless Hogan, Reflections from the Hogan, has addressed many of our tribal nations' most pressing issues. Mark is a graduate of UCLA who has long been known for denouncing the doctrine of discovery and for speaking out in opposition to the Dakota Access Pipeline. Mark is also known for encouraging people everywhere to address sensitive issues like race tensions through dialogue and education. On his 2020 website, Mark states, "Throughout the history of the United States, the words, 'we the people,' have never meant all the people. I think it is time we correct that." Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great honor to introduce our first Dene candidate for President of the United States, Mr. Mark Charles.
Mark Charles Inishia, Sin Bake Dinan National to Tohiglini Bashin, Sin Bake Dinan Dashiche, to Todichi Dashinala. In the Navajo culture, when we introduce ourselves, we always give our 4 clans. We're a matrilineal people, and our identities come from our mother's mother. Now, my mother's mother happens to be American of Dutch heritage, and so I say Sin Bake Dinan. Translated, that means I'm from the wooden shoe people. My father's mother, my second clan, is Tohiglini, which is the waters that flow together. My third clan, my mother's father, is also Tsinbake-Dene, and my fourth clan, my father's father, is Todachitni, and that's the Bitterwater clan. It's one of the original clans of our Navajo people. I was deeply humbled this morning when I learned that someone from the Winnebago was going to be introducing me. It is wherever I go, wherever I travel, I always try to acknowledge, whenever I can, the people of the land whose land I'm standing on. And so to be introduced by someone from the Winnebago whose lands are just south of here, and to have met several people from the Omaha whose lands are right here as well, and to be among all of my Native relatives from Indian country all over the nation who have come here today for this historic forum. I feel so at home. All we need is a mutton stand and some fried bread and a good breakfast burrito this morning, and I'd have the greasy lips and everything would be all set. But it's an honor to be here. And whenever I travel, not only do I try to acknowledge the people whose land I'm standing on, and I do this because our history books teach us a history that I refer to more as a mythology. And when I acknowledge the people whose land that I'm standing on, it reminds me that the history of this land predates what was written in our books, and that there were nations and families who hunted here and fished here and farmed here and raised their families here and buried their ancestors here. And this knowledge, it's good to remember that this land was not discovered. And second, it's humbling to recognize that there is a history that predates what we're taught in our history books. The second thing I've been taught is that you acknowledge your elders. And I think we have the elder in the room right here with Marcella LaBelle. I want to address you personally because I listened to the questions you asked of the candidates yesterday. And while many of them acknowledged your story and said they appreciated what you said and they would remember your words, you asked about something that none of them addressed. And that's the doctrine of discovery. Now, you are not the only one who this has happened to. Academics like Stephen Newcomb, filmmakers from our native tribes and our native traditions have produced films and written books and written papers and traveled to the Vatican and addressed White House and congressional members and presidents, trying to get this nation to wrestle with this doctrine of discovery. And nobody knows how to do that. Nobody wants to take on that burden. But we keep asking. And when the 99-year-old elder in the room asks a question, as a man who is both a citizen of the United States and a citizen of the Navajo Nation, I want to respect you, I want to honor you, and I want to answer your question. Invade, search out, capture, vanquish, and subdue. All Saracens and pagans whatsoever. Convert them to your exploitation and profit. These are the words of Pope Nicholas V in a papal bull written in 1452. This papal bull, along with other papal bulls, collectively become known as what we call the doctrine of discovery. The doctrine of discovery is essentially the church in Europe saying to the nations of Europe, wherever you go, whatever lands you find not ruled by white European Christian rulers, those people are less than human and their land is yours to take. This is literally the doctrine that let European nations go into Africa, colonize the continent, and enslave the people because they did not believe them to be human. This is the same doctrine that let Columbus, who was lost at sea, land in this new world already inhabited by millions and claim to have discovered it. You cannot discover lands that are already inhabited. Now, to some of the non-natives in the room, this may be a bit of a surprise. If you don't believe me, leave your car keys, your cell phones, your laptops out in front of you. There are a few natives in the room who would be happy to come by, including myself, and discover them for you. Clearly, this is not discovery. This is conquering, this is stealing, this is colonizing. The fact that to this day, this nation acknowledges Christopher Columbus as the discoverer of America reveals the implicit racial bias, which is that native peoples and people of color are not fully human. Now, the challenge is what we've done with this doctrine of discovery. So in 1763, King George drew a line down the Appalachian Mountains, and he said to the colonies that were here that they no longer had the right of discovery of the empty Indian lands west of Appalachia. This upset the colonies. They wanted access to those lands. So a few years later, they wrote a letter of protest. In their letter, they accused the king of raising the conditions of new appropriations of land. They went on to state that he has excited domestic insurrections amongst us and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers, the merciless Indian savages. They signed their letter on July 4th, 1776. Literally 30 lines below the statement, all men are created equal, the Declaration of Independence refers to Native peoples as merciless Indian savages, making it very clear the only reason they use this inclusive term, all men, is because they had a very narrow definition of who was actually human. This makes our Declaration of Independence a systemically white supremacist document. that assumes the dehumanization of Native peoples and people of color. A few years later, our founding fathers wrote another document. They begin this one with the words, "We the people of the United States." Again, "we the people" sounds inclusive. But if you read just a few lines later, Article 1, Section 2, the section of the Constitution that determines who is and who is not a citizen of this union, who is and who is not covered by this Constitution, the first thing you have to note in Article 1, Section 2 is it never mentions women. Now, this is important because if you read the entire Constitution from the preamble down to the 27th Amendment, you will find that there are 51 gender-specific male pronouns. Who can run for office, who can hold office, even who is protected by this document. 51, he, him, and his, and not a single female pronoun in the entire document. So we have to note, Article 1, Section 2 never mentions women. Specifically, next, it excludes natives, and then it counts Africans as 3/5 of a person. So who's left? Well, it leaves white men. And technically, it was white landowning men who could vote. See, we don't think about this enough. The reason we have a constitution, the purpose of the United States Constitution, is to protect the interests of white landowning men. So today we act surprised that women earn 70 to 80 cents to the dollar. This shouldn't surprise us. The Constitution's working. We act appalled that our prisons are filled with people of color. This shouldn't surprise us. The Constitution's working. People get upset that in 2010, the Supreme Court sided with Citizens United and rules that corporations now have the same rights to political free speech as individuals. This opens the door for super PACs and their unlimited support for candidates. This should not surprise us. The Constitution is doing exactly what it was designed to do, is protecting the interests of white landowning men. Now, many people say, well, we've corrected that. Well, we tried. In the 1800s, we passed the 13th Amendment. Now, most people think the 13th Amendment abolishes slavery. They think it says neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall exist within the United States. But what it actually says is neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime, shall exist within the United States. So have we ever abolished slavery? No. Where is it legal? Prison. Well, it should surprise no one that the United States of America incarcerates its citizens at the highest rate of any country in the world, and we incarcerate our people of color at 3 to 5 times the rate we incarcerate white Americans. There is a debate going on in the Democratic primaries right now about do we need to pay reparations to the ancestors of former slaves. And I absolutely am thrilled that we are having that debate because that is a piece of our history that this nation needs to be held accountable for. And I agree we need to pay reparations, but one of the primary planks of my platform, and I cannot believe I have to say this running as a candidate in 2020, but one of the primary planks of my platform is that we need to, as the United States of America, abolish slavery, period. That clause in the 13th Amendment, I have an article on my website, and rather than amending the Constitution, I edited it. The strike-through font is beautiful. I put a strike-through font through that clause. We never should have said this. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall exist within the United States or any place under their jurisdiction, period. No clause. We need to abolish slavery in the United States of America. In 1823, there was a Supreme Court case, Johnson versus McIntosh. It's 2 men of European descent. They're litigating over a single piece of land. One of the men acquired the land from a native tribe. The other acquired the same land, they said, from the government. They want to know who owned it. The case went all the way to the Supreme Court. The court had to decide the principle upon which land titles were based. And they ruled that the principle, this was the John Marshall Court in 1823, they ruled that the principle was that discovery gave title to the government, by whose subjects, and by whose authority it was claimed. And they went on to reference this doctrine of discovery and use that to conclude that natives who were here first, but are savages and therefore less than human, we only had what's called the right of occupancy to the land. Some would say like a fish would occupy water or a bird would occupy air, and Europeans had the fee title to the land, the right of discovery to the land, and therefore they are the true title holders. This case, along with a few others in the 1820s and 30s, created the legal precedent for land titles. This precedent and the doctrine of discovery get referenced by the Supreme Court in 1954, in 1985, and most recently in 2005. In this campaign, you will hear a lot of people talking about we need to change this law. We need to have this proposal. We need to do this differently. Now, if you have a house that's built on a bad foundation, you're going to get cracks in your walls, you're going to get gaps in your windows, and you're going to get a creaky and crooked floor. And you can scream, and you can holler, and you can fight about what color to paint the walls, what kind of caulking to use in your windows, and what kind of carpet to put on your floor. But until you go into the basement and examine your foundations and do something to firm those up and to make those strong, you're never going to fix the problems in the house. So my campaign, the theme of my campaign is I want to build a nation. I want to be a part of building a nation where for the very first time, we the people truly means all the people. Yeah, my relatives, I am looking forward to your questions. I'm looking forward to the dialogue we're going to have. Thank you for having me here. It is my honor to be among you today.
Thank you. Our first question will come from Marcella Laveau, our elder.
Good morning. I'm from the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe. My Lakota name is Pretty Rainbow Woman, given to me by my grandmother. As Lakota, we know that Washte means good, but my mother translated it as Pretty Rainbow Woman, and I hang on to her words. I lost her when I was 10 years old. So I'm here today with a big question. Back on our reservation, on the Cheyenne River Reservation, to me, in my opinion, there is a pervasive sadness that exists there because of Wounded Knee and what happened there. We have descendants living on our reservation in Standing Rock, and there has never been closure to Wounded Knee. They gave 20 medals of honor to soldiers of the 7th Cavalry for bravery and whatever else they called it. I'm a World War II veteran, and I know honorable soldiers. These 20 medals of honor were given to the 7th Cavalry for the things that they did there. They murdered women and children. And Bigfoot, who was ill with pneumonia, lying there, no weapon, under a flag of truce. So the big question today is, there is a lawsuit now started by C.J. Simmons, and it has to do with revoking the Medals of Honor that were awarded at Wounded Knee in 1890. So my question is, will you support the removal of the Stain Act? And that's to remove the 20 Medals of Honor that were given back then. So that's the big question today we want to think about and take action on. And I understand it's moving, and it now has a number. So that would like to have consideration for that.
Thank you for that question. First of all, I just want you to say absolutely. Absolutely. But second, like most things about the history of our nation, is we don't know how to tell the full story. And most of the country doesn't know the full story. At Wounded Knee, and most of the Lakota obviously know this story, but most of the nation doesn't. At Wounded Knee, there was negotiations going on between the Army and the Lakota people. Neither side trusted each other. There were a lot of weapons present. And when the massacre broke out, many of the women and children fled into a ravine at Wounded Knee, seeking shelters from up to this battery of Hotchkiss cannons they had there, the U.S. Army had there, as well as all of the guns from the soldiers. And they ran into this ravine seeking shelter. Now, if you go out and you research the Medals of Honor given at Wounded Knee, you will find that 3 of them, one of them to an officer, McMillan, or to someone in the Army, McMillan, one to Gresham, and I forget the name of the third one right now. But 3 of these medals were given specifically because they went in and directed fire into the ravine and flushed the Lakota people out of the ravine. This is why they were awarded Medals of Honor. Absolutely, we need to rescind these medals. They have no place in a nation that claims to value freedom and equality and diversity and pluralism. These medals are not only a stain, they are blood dripping from the clothes of this nation. We don't just need to rescind them, we need to wash the clothes. Now, third, we have to understand why this nation celebrates massacres like Wounded Knee. So initially, the Protestant church pushed back against the doctrine of discovery. This was a Catholic doctrine, they didn't fully buy into it. In 1630, John Winthrop, the pastor, was in what's now called the Boston Harbor, and he was with a group of colonists to plant the Boston colony. And on board this ship, he preached a sermon called A Model of Christian Charity. In this sermon, he referred to the colonists he was with as a city upon a hill, right? You've heard many candidates and presidential people talk about this city on a hill as this nation. Well, they're actually borrowing from the language of Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount, where he's telling his disciples to be a lamp on a stand, a city on a hill, shining their good deeds into this dark world. He goes on in his sermon to exhort the people to do your basic Christian things and to live together and to work together and to labor and suffer together. But at the end of his sermon, he begins quoting from Deuteronomy chapter 30. Now, Deuteronomy chapter 30 is the passage in the Old Testament where the people of Israel are standing at the banks of the Jordan River, ready to cross over and take possession of their promised lands. And Deuteronomy 30 is reiterating the threats and promises of their land covenant with the God of Abraham that says, if you obey me, I will do these things for you. If you disobey me, I'll do these things to you. And it says, but if our hearts shall turn away so that we will not obey and we worship other gods, we will surely perish out of the good land, whether we cross over this river, the Jordan, to claim it, to possess it. Now, Deuteronomy 30 says river, identifies it as the Jordan River. But in his sermon, John Winthrop changed the word river to vast sea. Why would he do that? Well, he didn't cross a river, he crossed an ocean. So what's he saying? Based on the legacy of Old Testament promised lands, they are standing on the banks of their promised land, ready to take possession of them. I love the title of Stephen Newcomb's book on the doctrine of discovery. It's called Pagans in the Promised Land. Because if you read the books of Deuteronomy and Leviticus, you will learn what the people of Israel were called to do to the Canaanites who were inhabiting their promised land. And the actual command literally is to kill all of them, to leave no man, no woman, no child, no animal left alive. Promised land for one people is literally God-ordained genocide for another. I call that sermon the birth of American exceptionalism. That idea percolates for about 100 years. Mid-1800s, our nation goes past the Appalachian Mountains, they go past the Mississippi River. End of the 1800s, the Second Great Awakening happens. There's this religious fervor as the nation's going further and further west. Late 1700s, early 1800s. The other two happened in 1700s. Early 1800s. The term manifest destiny is coined. The belief that this nation has the God-given right. These white landowning men have the authority of God to rule this continent, Turtle Island, from sea to shining sea. In 1862, President Abraham Lincoln signs the Pacific Railway Act. This act provides the money and the resources to bring the Transcontinental Railway, which had reached Omaha, Nebraska, all the way to the Pacific Ocean. Now, there were 5 proposed routes of the railway. One, the primary route went from Omaha to San Francisco. There was another route that went from Duluth, Minnesota to Seattle. And the third route that went through the territory of New Mexico, Arizona, and came out near Los Angeles. Within 2.5 years of signing that act, after the Dakota War of 1862 and the hanging of the Dakota 38, after rescinding and revoking the treaties of the tribes in Minnesota and removing the tribes into the Dakotas, after the massacre at Sand Creek and the removal of the Cheyenne and Arapaho from Colorado and Wyoming, and after the Long Walk and the rounding up of the Navajo, the Diné, and the Mescalero Apache, moving us down to the death camp at Bosque Redondo, Abraham Lincoln has ethnically cleansed the states of Minnesota, Colorado and Wyoming, and New Mexico to make room for this transcontinental railway, leaving him one of the most genocidal presidents in the history of our nation. And we don't teach this history. We don't talk about this. It was so bad that in 1851, Peter Burnett, the first governor of California, in his State of the State address, he said that a war of extermination exists between the white and the Indian race. And it will not complete until the Indian race is extinct. Must be expected. And while we cannot anticipate this result, but with painful regret, the inevitable destiny of the race is beyond the power or wisdom of man to avert. Now, he's not saying a famine's broken out and we can't feed these people. And he's not saying disease has happened and we can't stop its spread. He is literally saying we cannot stop killing them until they become extinct. If you research medals of honor for battles between 1839 and 1898, you will find that the U.S. awarded 425 medals of honor for soldiers who participated in the Indian War campaigns. At the start of the 1800s, the nation had reached about up to here. By the end of the 1800s, they had completed manifest destiny. The non-native population in 1800 was 5.3 million. In 1900, it was 76.2 million. The estimated native population in the 1800s was 600,000. The estimated population reached its lowest point in 1870 at 237,000. If you're doing the math, that's a 65% rate of genocide, which is higher than the rate of genocide Nazi Germany had over the Jews. And we awarded 425 medals of honor for the ethnic cleansing and genocide of Native peoples. We absolutely have to rescind these 20 medals of honor for Wounded Knee. but there are 425 Medals of Honor that have no place in a union that claims to value freedom and equality and diversity.
I'll try to get through 7 questions as quickly as we can. Our first question comes from Cherie Thunder, the Native Organizers Alliance.
Hoso Mauniwiak. Niwiswan Cherie Thunder. I am from the Menominee Nation in Wisconsin, and I am part of a grassroots, an indigenous-led grassroots organization called Minneconnekim, the Community Rebuilders. And I'm also a volunteer and an alumni from the Native Organizers Alliance training. So here's my question for Mr. Charles. The mistreatment, disrespect, and really the desecration of our First Nations women is directly related to resource extraction and environmental degradation taking place primarily in or near tribal nations. What will you do to stop colonial acts of violence against our First Nations women and our Mother Earth? The root cause of all violent acts, from separation of our children to the rape and murder of our mother and sisters, is colonial violence. How will you act as an ally to ensure that we can continue to restore our inherent rights as Indigenous peoples to protect and preserve life? Because our way of self-governing is life restoring. Where colonialism is based on power and violence, we don't need more colonial systems. We need more First Nations with ability to strengthen and create our own.
Thank you for asking that question. The issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls is heartbreaking. Having lived in Indian country, having spent 11 years on our reservation, having taken part in protests and activism to raise up the issues of the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, has been something that I've been a part of, and it's an issue that has to be addressed. Again, we have to understand why this is an issue for our country. Author Willie Jennings talks about what's called a proximity to whiteness. I want to expand on that thought a minute. When you have a nation that was designed to protect and promote white landowning Christian men, what it does is it creates this proximity to whiteness. It creates these avenues where people can get into this point of privilege. So if you're a white landowning Christian male, this nation is your oyster. And it provides access and means and all these tools for you to be wildly successful and unimaginably wealthy. If you don't fit all those categories, you have less and less avenue into that area. And at the lowest level of that, the people who have the least amount of access into that system is our Native women living on reservations. Why? They're not male, they're not white. If they're on our reservations, they're probably not Christian. And because they live on our reservations, they can't become landowners because these are federal trust lands. So they have no access into this system. When you have a constitution that was written to protect white landowning men and never mentions women, you have laws that have an implicit bias that don't protect the vulnerable communities. There was a case a year ago, a crime that happened 2 years ago in Alaska where a white man assaulted, and I have to warn people that this case was graphic. And I do not want to trigger or bring up trauma in anybody. But there are some graphic things that we need to talk about here. There was a case in Alaska where a white man assaulted a Native woman. He picked her up as a hitchhiker, offered her a ride, took her out, choked her and threatened to kill her. She passed out, and then he masturbated over her and ejaculated on top of her. She woke up covered with semen. She identified him to the police. He was arrested. He pled guilty, and he was let off with probation. Why? Because it's not considered sexual assault to ejaculate your semen on an unconscious woman. Think about that. And why did we hear about it? Because she was a Native woman. And our media doesn't cover Native peoples. Missing and murdered indigenous women is a massive, massive problem in our country, in our communities. Probably most everyone in the room has not just heard about this on the news. You probably have a relative, a friend, a neighbor who is missing or has been murdered or has been assaulted and was not properly followed up on. A lot of candidates are going to propose that we need new laws to protect these vulnerable communities. I would say we don't need new laws. We need a new basis for our law. When you have a constitution that never mentions women, you cannot act surprised when women are assaulted, murdered, and go missing, and law enforcement and society doesn't care. We don't need a new law. We need a new basis for our laws. We need to deal with the foundations of the country. And that is what my campaign is about. I am trying to get our nation to look at our foundations and to recognize that we the people has never meant all the people. And until we the people includes indigenous women living on our reservations, we the people will never mean all the people. Thank you for that question, but more than that, thank you for the work that you do and that I have had the privilege in some capacity to be a part of, to raise this issue to the forefront of this nation that doesn't know how to deal with its own history. Yeah.
Thank you.
We have a request from the internet to make sure that the microphones are close to your mic or your face because the live stream is sometimes hard to hear. The next question is Larry Wright from Ponca.
Aho, Ponca Moshe Wongide. Welcome, Mr. Charles. I'd be remiss and I would get run out of office if I didn't point out that our Ponca people call this area home too. And we have a tribal office just a couple blocks from here. So we welcome you as well.
I apologize for not being aware of that.
No worries.
Thank you.
No problem. My question is on tribal consultation or the lack thereof. In my 16 years involved with our tribal government in some capacity, this has been an issue facing not only my tribe, but tribes across the nation. In this area, no better example could be given than KXL and DAPL and the lack of consultation and what that's meant to the tribal nations that have been involved with that issue. Consultation is typically agencies coming out to tell us what they've planned, what they've done, and to tell us what they're going to do. So tribal consultation was initially made an official policy of the federal government by President Clinton's Executive Order 13175. The Bush administration failed to follow the policy, but the Obama administration issued a memorandum requiring federal agencies to engage in tribal consultation on issues impacting Indian country. Tribal consultation is best when consultation is mandatory and consistent, feedback is made public, and metrics are used to determine whether or not feedback is implemented by the agency. As president, how do you plan to revise, amend, and implement the tribal consultation executive order?
Thank you for that question. So one of the challenges we face in this tribal consultation is, again, the foundations were written with the understanding that natives are savages. And the issue of tribal sovereignty defines and has defined the relationship of native tribes as domestic dependence. I tell people when I travel and we talk, and the tribal sovereignty issue is brought up, I tell people that as Native peoples, it feels like tribal sovereignty. We're sovereign over our land like your teenage child is sovereign over their bedroom, because of the doctrine of discovery and the fee title that the nation claims over our lands. Now, the challenge with this type of consultation is to somehow we have to raise up the role and understand that these treaties are with nation-to-nation treaties, and the Constitution defines that treaties are the supreme law of the land. But again, this mentality, this implicit bias is embedded so deeply. I want to talk for a moment about the 2005 case that referenced the doctrine of discovery most recently, and it was the Oneida Indian Nation versus the city of Sherrill of New York. And in the 1770s, the United Indian Nation occupied about 6 million acres of land in central state New York. The Washington administration reduced that down to 300,000 acres through a treaty. And then they said that only the federal government could buy lands from Native nations. And the state of New York continued to illegally purchase the United Indian Nation's lands until all the lands were purchased, white settlement had moved in, and the Uniteds had been completely removed from the state. In the late 1990s, the Oneida Indian Nation came back, and on the open market, they purchased some of their traditional lands at full price, and they wanted to begin to establish some of their sovereignty over these lands. The Oneida Indian Nation was, the lands they bought were within the city limits of the city of Sherrill, and the city of Sherrill wanted their tax revenue, so they sued the Oneida Indian Nation in federal district court, and the Oneida Indian Nation prevailed. So the city of Sherrill appealed to the Federal Court of Appeals, and the decision was upheld. So they appealed a second time to the Supreme Court, and the case was heard in 2004, 2005. The opinion of the Supreme Court in 2005 reversed the opinion of the lower courts. And in the first footnote of the case, they referenced the doctrine of discovery. And they went on to place the burden on the Oneida Nation and said that because you've waited 250 years to bring this case to the forefront, you cannot have your sovereignty over, you cannot reclaim sovereignty over these lands. In 1823, when John Marshall was laying out his argument of why natives could not have land title, fee title to our land, he used the word savages. And he said, but the Indian nations that inhabit these lands are fierce savages whose occupation is war and subsistence comes chiefly from the forest. To leave them in possession of their own country is to leave the land a wilderness. In 2005, the Supreme Court argued that it's been 250 years and the value of the lands have increased as these lands have been converted from wilderness to become parts of city like Sherrill. They're making the same argument, just not using the word savages. So then they conclude that based on the standards of federal Indian law and federal equity practice, the Oneida Indian Nation cannot rekindle embers of sovereignty that long ago grew cold. This is probably one of the most white supremacist Supreme Court arguments written in my lifetime. And it was written by Ruth Bader Ginsburg. See, when land titles are propped up by a dehumanizing doctrine of discovery, white supremacy becomes a bipartisan value. This is why consultation is not taken seriously. Because the foundation for land titles in this country is still dependent upon us not only being domestic dependents, but being savages. And this is why, as a nation, if we want to fix this, we don't only need to have presidents who commit to consult with our native nations. We need to change the basis of our laws so our land titles are no longer based on our dehumanization. I deeply appreciate your question. I absolutely understand the problem. And I'm hoping that by addressing it at a foundational level, we can actually get to the point where we can have real nation-to-nation dialogue between our Indian nations and the U.S. government. Yeah, thank you for that question.
This is the moment that I dread. This will be the last question. We're not going to get to everybody on the panel. Our next question comes from Amber Torres from Walker River Pike.
Pija Wamawa, mi Amber Torres, mi Nania, Nua Agadikata Poinabi, Nua Agaigwe. Good afternoon, everybody. I am Amber Torres. I'm the chairman for the Walker River Paiute Tribe in Schurz, Nevada. First off, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for the powerful words this morning, and thank you for taking a healthy risk to show our tribal youth and our Native youth and our people that you can do whatever you want to do. Anything you want to do is possible, even running for president. My question is centered around education. Education can be transformative in many positive ways. The boarding school era is a testament to the ways in which education can be and has been used by the United States to purposefully destroy Native people, cultures, and languages. Reversal of this federal policy and restoration of cultural-based education and language immersion schools is imperative. It's imperative to the survival of our people and our nations. As president, what would you do to reserve the centuries of damage by the federal policy, and what steps would you take to restore culture and language in our educational systems across the nation?
Thank you for that question. One of the most moving experiences I've had regarding education was maybe 10 years ago. We were living on the Navajo Nation, and my son was attending a Navajo immersion school. And he was learning the language. He speaks it better than I do because he learned it as a child. And we were sitting there with one of his aunts. And we were talking, and she's a boarding school survivor, and he was asking her some questions about the language because she was able to retain her language, even though the boarding schools. And as we were talking, she began to weep. And she said, it was 50 years ago that I was literally being punished and having my language beaten out of me. And now you are attending a school taught by Navajo women and men, and you are learning the language and our culture in the school, the very same schooling system that was destroying it before. And she just began to weep at that. And it was a deeply moving moment because this damage of the boarding schools, the historical trauma that comes with this, it runs really, really deep in our communities. And I saw what happened to my children as they had an opportunity to attend this immersion school, and as they had an opportunity to not just learn the language, but what I noticed is that the teachers in this school, because they were using their culture and their language and all of who they were to teach, they didn't treat the children as students, they treated them as family. And that was so beautiful to see that. And the way that that empowered these children, not just my children, but the children of our community. I am absolutely convinced in the value of immersion education. I am convinced that not only will that allow the healing of our culture and our language that was tried to be stripped away from us by the government and the churches, but it will also be healing for our teachers, who have a chance to plant seeds of our communities and of our history and of our stories into these youth, and to see those flourish and grow as they go on into the 4th, 5th, 6th, and even the 7th generations. So yes, I am a massive fan of immersion education. I've seen it work in my own children. And I would love to see that, where if the federal government could invest that much money into killing the Indian to save the man, to forcibly assimilate to this nation, certainly we can invest money into using education to heal our Native nations.
Thank you. Please give a round of applause to the candidate and this panel.
May I say one last
You can't. And I have we have a quick announcement. another candidate coming at 1, and so you have a quick break. But when you come back, please sit as close as you can. Make sure you bring no food back in, and we'll be back at 1 o'clock. Thank you.
All right, everybody, just give me 1 second here. We do a few more announcements. That was Independent Mark Charles. You just listened to, again, we're here at the Native American Presidential Forum 2019. I'll show you my face. This 2019, and we're gonna mute this because this is gonna, like, the copyright music keeps shutting down our stream. But just stick with us. We brought you here. It's the first ever Native American-led questions to presidential candidates. Please listen to the questions. The candidates are great as well. We heard the Elizabeth Warren yesterday and Williamson, and I can't go through the list because that's things I gotta mute it. But yeah, there's gonna be more. But the questions are really important. So I'm glad you're here. I gotta mute it. Everyone, apologize again. We are muting this because they're playing copyrighted music. Facebook keeps taking down our videos of this historic event, so we're going to have to mute it between the panels. Stick with us. There is one coming up soon. Thanks again. We are at the Native American Presidential Forum. Also, YouTube keeps taking our stuff down. Anyways. Hey everyone, this is Lorenzo with Unicorn Riot. We're going to take the feed down for a little bit. We are here. Oh, I thought I was going to do really good. I didn't do a good job. Anyways, it's going to be an hour to the next panel. It'll be John Delaney. Will be the presidential candidate. I don't know. But anyways, again, we're here because the panelists are all Native American folks from different tribes, different age groups, different genders, asking questions of these candidates. If you are sticking with me, thank you so much for sticking around and watch this with me and listen and learn. And again, just take some time to kind of really listen to the questions that are being asked because they're coming directly from Indian country. Pretty important stuff. Anyways, we're going to take this down for an hour. We'll be back and just see what's going on. We're going to be sitting here, we'll be watching, we're going to be listening. But it's the first ever Native American Presidential Forum. So thanks for being here with me. And we'll be back. Peace. Oh, yeah, and if you like this stuff, we're a nonprofit educational platform. So go to Unicorn Riot, click support our work, give what you can. There's going to be no commercials. We provide this all for free through the internet so everyone can see it. That way there's no way the information can be stopped. But since we don't pay for commercials and we don't make a lot of money for these people, they don't like to share our stuff. So thanks for you sharing it, liking it, and donating. It's the only way it's possible. So that's it. We'll be back. Peace. Go ahead and take it down. And all right. Yeah. Did the outro there. We're gonna have to take this down. I gotta keep talking because this music will destroy the feed, but it's going down now. Thank you so much for joining us. It is